The president made several claims, some familiar, reiterating why he says the United States went to war, outlining what might be called a preemptive doctrine. The president saying at one point, as he has said before, quote, they would attack us, they had attacked their neighbors, and that's why he wanted to enter the conflict first, in his view. He made other claims that were unsubstantiated, pressed by reporters, for example, on his allegation of Iranian-friendly fire, and many other assertions. We have special guests standing by. We've been watching this with you, so I want to bring them in. Former diplomat and longtime journalist Rick Stengel. And on the economic side, where we have seen the gas and oil prices really change the dynamic to start the week, our CNBC colleague and economics expert, Steve Liesman. Welcome to both of you. Rick, what stood out to you in this, the president's really longest remarks about Iran since he started this war?
Thanks, Harry. What stood out to me is I think he got spooked by the oil prices going over 120 today. The stock market going down. He felt he had to come and try to explain what was going on, but he still can't explain exactly why he's doing what he did. He didn't call it a war. He called it an excursion. This time he basically used every possible rationale to explain it. Eliminate their nuclear threat, eliminate the ballistic missiles, help Israel, help the flow of oil. The question is, what is the actual purpose? What is the actual outcome he desires? And, you know, when you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So he can declare victory at any time. And I think that was the message that he was saying today to try to calm the markets, to say, you know what, this ends when I say it ends. I can declare victory and we can go home and everybody can go back to normal. But again, as I've said before, Ari, this is an incredibly dangerous thing. Just because he says it's very complete, whatever that means, doesn't mean that it is. And there's lots of consequences for the rest of the world still to be seen.
Steve, there's a lot of questions we have for you tonight, including our viewers and fellow citizens concerned about gas prices and planning their already tight budgets. But first, I want to get you on the most newsworthy part of this, which is, what did you hear in the president's view, or we could call it a theory, to be charitable, on the economics of this war and the days ahead? He made some kind of broad statements about why things economically will ultimately be okay.
Well, if I could take a step back, Ari, I think the question here is one that was just raised, which is this something the president can turn off? I generally agree with the idea that the president looked at the situation in the markets, looked at the situation with oil prices, and decided to take a step back. Certainly his rhetoric about this ending very soon is different from his rhetoric in his tweets on Saturday, where he talked about a continued extensive bombing campaign against Iran. What the key to the situation is here economically is, one journalist tried to get at it. There wasn't a follow-up, unfortunately, which is the opening of the Straits of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil goes through there. And the extent to which there is a continued economic impact from what's happening, it will be key as to the ability of the U.S. government or allies to keep open the Straits of Hormuz. They are closed now, as far as we understand. And what's unclear is, if the president stops now, can the U.S. open? Can the U.S. keep them open and resume the flow of oil? That will be the key. Right now, a massive increase in the price of oil, an increase in the price of gasoline, that could be temporary if the straits reopen, but it could be long-lasting if they remain closed and dangerous for quite a while.
Yes, Ari, what he said was false. The idea that Iran was an imminent threat to the United States is absurd. They don't have missiles that could reach the United States. They were not 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. People estimate they were years away, 5 years, even 10 years away. Remember, Trump said 8 months ago he had obliterated the nuclear threat in Iran. The idea that they could reconstitute a threat in a few months after spending decades trying to build a nuclear weapon is crazy. And so that is just a false premise. It's a false premise for going to war. They were not an imminent threat. In fact, my argument is that we invaded them precisely because it was not an imminent threat, because they were weak, their economy was damaged, their nuclear threat was diminished. That's why we hit them. So so much of what he said is absolutely false, and Americans should realize that he took us to war on a false premise. And now I don't even remember what your second long question was, Ari.
Well, that's on me. But the second question was whether you can assess his foreign policy claim that he will choose the preemptive war and it will work. That again, it's early days, but that his actions, including militarily eliminating part of the Iranian leadership, now replaced by another hardliner, and the other actions to constrain this country will work to the U.S.'s and perhaps allies' benefit in the region.
Well, the truth is it may be effective for eliminating whatever Iran's threat was in the Middle East. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a world where superpowers can preemptively invade another power because they think that that power is threatening them in some way. This gives a permission structure for Russia in Ukraine. This gives a permission structure for China in Taiwan. It's a much darker world, a world of this kind of hyperpower world where people can control their interests where they live. So I don't think that's a good thing, and I think it sets a terrible precedent.
Yeah, I think you're reminding everyone how this works. Great power politics. If you're the biggest guy on the block, so to speak, in the short term, they can be very appealing. In the long term, the 20th century is littered with the great cost of that. And world wars started by powers that thought, well, we'll control this country and this region and this land. And it didn't work out well if you lived in those countries, let alone to say nothing everywhere else. I'm simplifying, Steve, because we don't have time to do 20th century history for the whole hour. So I hope people can handle the summary.
I'll do it.
I want to show... Go ahead.
I'll do it real fast, Ari, which is we have no track record of going into a country and creating a stable democracy. I spent 6 years in Russia, watched that failed program. We watched Iraq, we watched Afghanistan, and the results are less than overwhelming. The president talked about having this formula from Venezuela. I'm not quite sure what that is, but this is not, and fundamentally, Ari, I know this is not your question, but fundamentally different from the Liberation Day tariff, something the president has the power to turn on and turn off. Turning off war and turning off, and the results of this, the way you smash something and the pieces fly everywhere, there is no telling how this works out. And we have very little, not a very good track record in forming countries in the wake of these types of military actions.